My name is William Archer, and this is my confession. I did not come to buy the house back. I came to watch it die. The courthouse smelled of varnish and rain-soaked coats, of endings too formal to weep for. People murmured in the back rows, the way they do at funerals, when they are relieved it is not theirs. My name was not on any list. No one looked twice at me. 5 years away from the world had turned me into rumor. I preferred it that way. The Vaughn estate was the last thing that still carried my fingerprint. I built it when I still believed permanence could be designed. Marble stairs, long windows, a garden that caught the sunrise like a secret. And then, one headline, one betrayal, and the gates closed behind me forever. When she walked in, the noise changed. Celia Vaughn. Her face was thinner, her beauty quieter, but her eyes, God, her eyes were still the same fierce color of defiance and apology mixed together. She stood among the bidders with her shoulders drawn back, pretending not to feel everyone's gaze slice across her. She looked like someone trying to stand on the wreckage of her own name. The clerk read the numbers, the auctioneer called the bids. I sat in the last row, hat low, heartbeat steady in a way that felt rehearsed. I told myself I did not care who won. But when Celia's voice broke the air, 200,000, something in my chest moved, and old gear rusted by years of silence. Her hand trembled. The man beside her smirked and raised the bid without looking at her. She went higher once, twice, but her voice lost conviction. I saw the moment defeat found her. It wasn't loud. It was in the way her fingers unclenched, and how her gaze dropped not to the floor, but somewhere inward, where dignity hides when pride runs out. Sold, the auctioneer announced. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through me like a closing door. Celia stood very still, then gathered her bag as if each movement cost her more than money ever could. She walked out without turning her head, the air parting around her. And I, fool that I was, rose and followed. Outside, the rain had started again. She didn't open her umbrella. The drops slid down her hair, darkening it to near black, clinging to her lashes. I could have called her name then, told her the man whose ruin she was blamed for had been sitting 10 feet behind her. But I didn't. Words were too small for what lived in that moment. She paused at the edge of the steps, staring at the street like it was a foreign country. Her shoes were soaked, her hands shaking as she tried to light a cigarette. It wouldn't catch. The lighter flicked again and again until finally I stepped forward and struck a match. She looked up. The flame's reflection lived for a second in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, not recognizing me. Just another stranger offering small mercy. "You're welcome," I managed, voice rough from disuse. When she walked away, I watched the smoke curl behind her like a fragile promise. I told myself it was curiosity that made me follow her down the street. But truth always hides behind convenient words. It wasn't curiosity. It was memory, breathing again after too many years underground. And as she disappeared into the blur of rain and headlights, I knew that whatever exile I had chosen for myself was ending. Because the moment she stepped back into my world, the silence I had lived in began to crack, one heartbeat at a time. Her name had once been said like a prayer. Celia Vaughn, the woman who could turn abandoned factories into art museums, the architect of light itself. People wrote about her like she'd been born made of glass and gold. Until the day they found her signature on a contract she swore she never signed. One forged line, one missing grant, and the world tore her apart without looking twice. I watched it all from afar. From exile. The newspapers said she had ruined my fortune, that her mismanagement was the reason I disappeared. I let them believe it. It was easier than facing the truth, that I'd let her take the fall because I no longer had the strength to defend anything, least of all myself. Now, seeing her again, I understood what silence costs. The woman who had once filled rooms with light looked smaller, folded in on herself like something delicate packed away for too long. But there was still that impossible grace, broken, yes, but not destroyed. The kind of beauty that refuses permission to die. I followed her that afternoon. Not close enough to frighten her, but near enough to see the world she lived in now. A cheap apartment over a bakery, the windows cracked open to the rain. She carried groceries that looked too light for a week's worth of meals. Inside, she fed a stray cat before herself. I stood across the street, feeling like an intruder at a confession. Later, when she turned off the lights, I stayed under the awning, listening to the city's hum. It had been years since I'd wanted to knock on any door, but my hand almost lifted. Almost. I told myself it wasn't love. It was guilt wearing her perfume. Yet the ache in my chest disagreed. The next morning, I went back to the old estate. My estate? The new owner had left it to rot, and the gates hung crooked, vines swallowing the marble lions. I walked through the rain-soaked halls where we'd once thrown parties that lasted until sunrise. The chandeliers were gone, the windows cracked, and I could still hear her laughter echoing against the ghosts of our past selves. In the ballroom, I found a single photograph, curled with moisture. Celia standing by the grand staircase, smiling up at me as I adjusted her necklace. The memory hit like lightning, the warmth of her skin beneath my fingers, the scent of jasmine, the way she whispered, asterisk. "Don't let this world turn you into stone, William." Asterisk. It had. Completely. That night, I poured myself a drink I didn't want and stared at her picture until dawn. I thought about how easily people are erased. One rumor, one accusation, and everything they built is devoured by public hunger. I had built walls to keep myself safe, but now I saw what I'd done. I'd locked her out too. Somewhere between the last sip and the first light, I made a choice I didn't recognize as madness yet. I would find out the truth about her downfall. Not for justice, not even for redemption, those words were too clean. I wanted to see her stand in the sun again. Because as much as I'd tried to bury her under the ruins of my own pride, the truth was mercilessly simple. I had never stopped loving her. The Vaughn estate had always looked like a promise carved in stone. Now it looked like memory refusing to die. Ivy choked the iron gates, and the garden she once designed had turned into a wilderness of thorns. The marble fountain stood dry, filled with leaves instead of water. I had not stepped inside in 5 years, not since the scandal turned every room into a courtroom. But fate, in its quiet cruelty, found a way to draw her back to me. When I arrived to inspect the property under my false name, Mr. Lawrence, a buyer's consultant, the caretaker mentioned a restorer hired to catalog what was left before demolition. "Some architect fallen on hard times," he said. "You'll like her. She works cheap." And then I saw her again. Celia. She was kneeling by the broken banister, her fingers tracing the dust like it was scripture. Her hair, tied loosely at the nape of her neck, had escaped in soft curls that brushed her collarbone. She was thinner than before, but the way she moved, the concentration, the reverence, made her seem luminous even in the ruin. "Mr. Lawrence," she greeted without looking up. "I'll start in the library. It deserves to be remembered properly." Her voice carried the steadiness of someone who refused to be defined by pity. She didn't recognize me, not yet. The beard, the grayer hair, the years of silence had remade me into a stranger. I told myself it was better this way. She could speak freely. I could listen to the truth I'd been too proud to hear. As she worked, the air filled with the rhythm of her pencil scratching across the sketchbook. Sometimes she hummed under her breath, an old melody she used to play on the piano when the house was alive. The sound broke something open in me. "You knew the family?" I asked, pretending to be casual. Her hand paused. Once. Before everything. She looked up, eyes distant. They were kind to me. Kind. The word stabbed. She had every right to hate me, and instead she offered kindness to the ghost of the man who ruined her. Days passed like that. She restored fragments of my life piece by piece, a cracked mirror from the ballroom, a painting warped by humidity, a brass doorknob engraved with my initials. I stayed close under the pretense of oversight, but the truth was simpler. I couldn't bear to let her out of sight again. One evening, as the sun bled through the dusty windows, she lingered by the grand piano. Her hand rested on the keys. "It's strange," she said softly. "When I stand here, I can almost feel him still." "Who?" I asked, though my heart already knew. "William Archer," she whispered. "The man who owned this house. They say he vanished after I ruined him." Her eyes shimmered with uncried tears. "I wish I could tell him I'm sorry." The words cut deeper than any accusation ever could. I wanted to tell her I was there, breathing the same air, aching with the same regret, but my courage failed. Instead, I said, "Maybe he already knows." She smiled faintly, and for one impossible moment, the dying light caught her face just as it used to, half sorrow, half grace. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her voice echoed in every empty corridor of my mind. The woman the world had buried was here, piecing together a house that had never truly stopped being ours. And as she worked, I realized something terrifyingly beautiful. She wasn't restoring my home. She was restoring me. A storm rolled in that evening, the kind that shakes old roofs into confession. The wind howled through the broken shutters, rain striking the glass like impatient fingers. Celia was still working in the library, surrounded by boxes of cracked picture frames and faded blueprints. I told her to stop, that the storm would cut the power soon, but she only smiled. "Then I'll finish before the dark wins," she said. The lights flickered, once, twice, and the house surrendered to shadow. Silence spread, broken only by the hiss of rain and the slow creak of wood remembering its age. I found her by the faint glow of her flashlight, crouched beside the fireplace, hair damp from the leak above. "Mr. Lawrence," she murmured, turning the beam toward me. "You startled me." Her light caught my face. For a heartbeat, I thought she might see through the disguise, the years, the beard, the name I wore like armor, but she only smiled again, soft and tired. "I didn't think anyone would love this place enough to stay after dark," I said. "I used to," she whispered, "before it belonged to ghosts." She sat on the floor, hugging her knees, the flashlight between us. The air smelled of dust and wet stone. I sat beside her without thinking. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain filled every silence. "You remind me of him," she said suddenly. My pulse stuttered. "Who?" "William Archer. The owner. They say he lost everything because of me." Her voice trembled, but not from fear, more like the ache of remembering too much. "And what do you say?" I asked quietly. She stared at the dying flame. "That guilt is easier to live with than pity. People forgave me so easily it felt like another kind of punishment. I didn't ruin him, but I didn't save him either." Her honesty gutted me. I wanted to take her hands, to tell her the truth, that I hadn't needed saving, only understanding. That I had loved her once in a way that frightened me into silence. Instead, I reached toward the hearth and added a splintered plank. The flame caught, trembling back to life. "Maybe ghosts stay," I said slowly, "not because they're angry, but because they still love what was lost." She looked up at me, and something passed between us, recognition, fragile but certain. The kind that happens when two wounds recognize the same scar. "Do you believe in second chances, Mr. Lawrence?" she asked. "I used to think they were myths," I said. "Now I'm not so sure." She smiled faintly. Then maybe you and I are both ghosts trying to start over. The storm raged harder, thunder cracking open the sky, but inside that ruined room, the world felt impossibly still. Her hand brushed mine, by accident or mercy, I'll never know, and every part of me that had been numb for years began to feel again. When the power returned, she stood slowly, the light haloing her hair. "Good night, Mr. Lawrence," she said softly. "Thank you for keeping the ghosts company." As she walked away, her shadow stretched long across the floor, and I realized the truth I could no longer ignore. I had lived 5 years pretending to be dead, but with her near, even my silence began to breathe again. After that night, I stopped pretending this was business. Every morning I woke before dawn, walked the hall she'd already restored, and felt the weight of what I'd done. She believed I was a quiet investor, some stranger interested in saving what was left of my own past. The lie tasted bitter now. I told myself I'd confess when I cleared her name, when I could offer her truth instead of guilt. The house had secrets, but so did the company that had built it. For 5 years I had buried the files, the numbers, the whispers that didn't add up. It was easier to vanish than to face how easily corruption had slipped under my door. Yet Celia's presence pulled me back to the ledger like gravity. Each night after she left, I opened my old archives and read until dawn. That was when I found it, a series of hidden accounts, transfers under the name D. Harland. My late partner. My wife's brother. The man who'd handled our charity foundation and sworn Celia was responsible for the missing funds. The trail led straight to him, neat as an apology written too late. The discovery made my hands shake. She hadn't ruined me. I had ruined her, by believing the wrong man, by letting grief make me blind. The scandal that ended her career had been the same one that broke my heart, and both had been built on a lie. The next day, I watched her from the library doorway. She stood on a ladder, repairing a cracked fresco on the ceiling, light spilling across her skin. She looked weightless up there, a fragment of the woman I used to know. "Careful," I said, stepping closer. "That beam's not stable." She laughed softly. "Neither am I." It was the first time I'd heard her laugh since the storm. The sound tore straight through me. "You're stronger than you think," I said. She looked down at me, eyes bright. "You talk like a man who's learned that the hard way." "I have." She climbed down slowly, and when her feet touched the floor, we stood too close for pretense. Dust floated between us like snow. Her hand brushed mine, deliberate this time. "You look at this place the way he used to," she whispered. "Like it's not ruined at all." I almost told her then who I was, what I'd found, but she smiled, and the words froze behind my teeth. She deserved a truth that came with proof, not confession. That night I drove to the city, back to the world I'd abandoned. My lawyer nearly fell out of his chair when I appeared in his office, demanding old records, demanding justice. "William, reopening this will expose everyone," he warned. "Good," I said. "Start with me." The investigation began quietly, like a tide creeping in. I followed paper trails, reopened accounts, forced old allies to speak. Every discovery burned, but every piece of evidence freed her name a little more. I returned to the estate near dawn, exhausted, covered in rain. The windows glowed with her light. She was still working. Through the glass I saw her standing by the grand staircase, touching the banister I built with my own hands. She looked up as if sensing me, though she couldn't see my face in the dark. In that moment, I understood what redemption truly was. Not a clean slate, not forgiveness from the world, but the quiet hope that the person you broke might still be willing to see you as human again. And as the first light spilled across the horizon, I made myself a promise. I would give her back her life, even if it meant losing mine all over again. Truth has a strange way of demanding light. Once it begins to surface, nothing can hold it underwater for long. 2 weeks after I had unearthed the documents, the investigation went public. My name, my company, my carefully built silence, everything cracked open. Reporters filled the gates of my city apartment, cameras flashing like judgment. They called me the vanished billionaire and the man resurrected by guilt. For once, they weren't wrong. I gave one statement, short and final. Celia Vaughn was innocent. Then I disappeared again, this time not to hide, but to watch. At the estate, she was already there, standing in the front hall, the newspaper crushed in her hand. I knew what headline she'd read. Fallen tycoon exposes family fraud, clears former protege's name. She turned as I stepped inside. No disguise now. No beard, no false name, only the man she once knew, returned from the dead. Her breath caught. William? The sound of my name on her lips hurt more than any accusation. I wanted to look anywhere but her face, yet I forced myself to meet her eyes. It was my fault, Celia. All of it. I believe them. I let you take the blame so I could vanish and call it grief. She didn't speak. The silence between us felt like a wound opening for air. I thought I was saving myself, I went on quietly. But I was just building a grave I could walk around in. Her eyes glistened, though she refused to let tears fall. You let me think I destroyed you, she whispered. You let me carry that weight alone. I know. My voice broke. I can't give back the years, but I can give you the truth. She turned away, pacing to the window where the light poured in pale and gold. The world forgave me this morning, she said. But that's not the forgiveness I needed. The words hung between us, sharp and trembling. I stepped closer, slowly, like approaching a wild creature that has every right to run. And what about now? I asked. She looked up at me. Now I don't know who you are. Then let me show you, I said. I took her hand, carefully, afraid she might pull away. She didn't. Her fingers were cold, but steady. The man you once loved was too proud to admit he was broken, I said. This one isn't. For a long time she said nothing. Then, softly, do you think the truth fixes everything? No, I whispered. But it's the only place love can start again. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. The sunlight shifted, falling across her face, and in it I saw the woman I had lost, the fierce, luminous Celia who had built worlds out of ruin. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than the wind. You've been a ghost in this house long enough, William. Maybe it's time you start living again. I wanted to answer, but my throat ached too much for words. So I only nodded, still holding her hand as if it anchored me to the present. Outside, the press shouted my name to the heavens. Inside, she stood close enough for me to smell the faint scent of rain in her hair. And for the first time in years, I understood what mercy felt like, not the kind that comes from others, but the kind that comes from being truly seen and not sent away. The house around us was still crumbling, but in that moment, it no longer felt like ruin. It felt like a beginning. In the days that followed, the world fed on our story. My face filled the screens I had once hidden from. Billionaire redeems fallen muse. They called it forgiveness, but forgiveness is quieter than headlines. It happens in the spaces between two people who dare to meet each other's eyes again. Celia didn't run. She could have. Instead, she stayed. She came to the estate every morning with paint under her nails and sketches rolled beneath her arm, moving through the ruins as if she could heal stone with her touch. I worked beside her, though half the time I only watched her, the sunlight, the small things that meant I was alive again. One afternoon, I found her on the terrace, barefoot, the wind lifting her hair. She was studying a cracked column, pencil moving gently across the page. I stood in the doorway too long, afraid to disturb her peace. "You know," she said without turning, "you used to hover like that. Always half in, half out of the moment." I smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard." She looked over her shoulder, then learned new ones. When I joined her, she handed me a sketch, a rough outline of the ballroom, not as it was but as she imagined it could be. "It's not about restoring it exactly," she said. "It's about giving it back its breath." The phrase hit me like a confession. "And what about us?" I asked. "Do we get to breathe again?" Her eyes softened. "If we stop holding our breath waiting for punishment." I didn't realize how close we were until she reached to tuck a loose thread from my sleeve. My pulse stumbled. "You haven't changed," I whispered. "Oh, William," she said, smiling sadly. "I've changed in every way that hurts." The sky was turning the color of honeyed smoke. She stood on tiptoe to test the wind's direction, her laugh breaking the heaviness in the air. For a heartbeat, she wasn't the woman the world had judged. She was the girl I had once loved in secret gardens and candlelit hallways, before ambition turned us into strangers. That evening, we dined together at the long oak table we'd uncovered from years of dust. The candlelight trembled between us. She spoke of her years in exile, the hunger, the loneliness, the constant proving of innocence. I told her about the silence I'd lived in, the self-imposed prison of wealth and guilt. By the time the candles burned low, we weren't confessing anymore. We were remembering how to speak without fear. When she rose to leave, I walked her to the door. She lingered in the threshold, her hand resting against the frame. "The world thinks you saved me," she said softly. "But you didn't. You just gave me back the part of myself I refused to mourn." Her words caught in my chest. "And what about me?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "You're still learning how to forgive yourself." "When you do, you'll find me here." The door closed behind her, leaving the scent of her perfume, amber and rain. I stood there for a long time, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade into the night. Outside, the stars broke through the last of the clouds. Inside, the light began to find its way through the cracks of the old house. Every beam that slipped through the walls touched something I thought was gone: warmth, tenderness, the fragile possibility of love returning not as a fire, but as morning. The house breathed again. You could hear it in the new floors that sighed under our steps, in the soft thrum of rain against clean glass instead of broken panes. Celia moved through the rooms like sunlight tracing the past, touching everything, forgiving everything. Months had passed since the truth came out, but I still woke each morning startled by peace. The scandal had faded into rumor, replaced by whispers of redemption and rebirth, words for people who watched from outside. Inside these walls, it was quieter, slower, almost holy. Celia arrived before dawn the day we finished. I found her standing in the great hall, staring at the chandelier she'd restored herself. Thousands of tiny crystals caught the light, scattering it like water. For the first time, the air didn't smell of dust, it smelled of paint, lavender, and her. "It's strange," she said, her voice soft. "I thought this house would always hurt to look at, but now it feels like it's finally forgiven us." I stepped beside her, close enough that our shoulders brushed. "It's not the house that forgave us," I said. "It was you." She turned, her eyes reflecting the shimmer above us. "You think I'm that generous? I know you are." For a long time, neither of us moved. The world outside went on, cars on the highway, birds on the roof, but here, everything was still. I could see every line of her face, every quiet proof of what time had taken and what it had given back. I keep thinking, she said slowly. We tried so hard to build perfect lives. Maybe all we ever needed was a place to start over. Then stay, I whispered. Start over here. Her breath caught. With you. I reached for her hand, the one that had rebuilt everything I destroyed. There's no house without you in it, Celia. She didn't answer at first. Then her fingers threaded through mine, and her smile, small, tremulous, utterly alive, was all the answer I'd ever needed. Later, we walked through every room together. The ballroom glowed again. The cracked mirrors had been replaced, though she left one fragment untouched. A reminder, she said, of what broke and what survived. In the library, the fire we'd once shared flickered in the hearth. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of years lift. You could sell it now, she murmured. Start somewhere new. I already have, I said. Outside, the evening settled over the valley. Light spilled from the windows, our light, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting my own life. She turned to face me then, her hair haloed in gold, and I knew the truth I'd been circling for months. I hadn't rebuilt this house for redemption. I'd rebuilt it to have a reason to stay. When she kissed me, it wasn't dramatic or desperate. It was steady, certain, like the world exhaling after holding its breath too long. Her hands rested against my chest, and I realized how strange it felt to have a heartbeat that no longer hurt. Outside, the wind quieted. The chandelier above us caught the last light of day, scattering it in tiny, shimmering fragments that danced across her skin. She smiled up at me, whispering, "We brought it back to life." "No," I said softly, brushing my thumb along her jaw. "You did." And for the first time since the world had broken, I believed in forever, not as something perfect or endless, but as something that could be rebuilt, one touch, one breath, one forgiven heartbeat at a time. Tell me in the comments what you think about this story. Did it move you? And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Rumor says everyone who does will get something good today. Maybe a message. Maybe a smile. Or maybe that small miracle that's already on its way to you.